مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. قبل 10 أعوام تم تسريب معلومات عن طريق مستشار في وكالة الأمن القومي. قال إنه شعر بخيبة عمل من البرامج السرية التي اعتبرها غير أخلاقية. لم يلتزم بوعده للحكومة الأميركية ونشر آلاف الوثائق التي كشفت أسرارا بالغة الأهمية لدى الاستخبارات الأمريكية. إنه يعيش الآن في روسيا. بعد 10 أعوام يحدث شيء مختلف. مجند في الحرس الوطني الجوي برتبة منخفضة أراد إثارة إعجاب أصدقائه، لكن النتيجة مشابهة، وأصبح مسؤولا عن خرق أمني هائل كشف فيه بعض الأسرار الاستخباراتية الأمريكية أمام العالم بأسره. ما هو الضرر الناجم عن تسريبات ديسكورد؟ لماذا لا تستطيع حكومتنا كتمان الأسرار؟ وهل تكمن المشكلة في أنه لدينا الكثير من الأسرار لكتمانها؟ لمناقشة مواضيع الاستخبارات السرية والسياسة الخارجية الأمريكية يسرني أن أستضيف الخبيرين دينيس روس ووان زراتي. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. For the second time in a decade, someone invested with the trust of the United States government violated that trust and released an enormous trove of secrets around the world. How important is secrecy in the making of American foreign policy? Do too many people have too many secrets? What does it all mean for the next phase of our trying to influence allies and adversaries alike? I'm delighted to discuss this topic with two of the smartest people in Washington, Juan Zarate and Dennis Ross. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us this morning. So, secrecy. In the making of foreign policy, you've both done it. How important are secrets? Dennis?
Well, I think secrecy is important when you're trying to conduct diplomacy. I say that because a lot of diplomacy depends upon asking others to do things that may be difficult for them. And if that's the case, you have to take into account what are their political needs. Just as we have to take into account our political needs, everybody needs an explanation for what they're doing. There is also timing. I often say that timing is to statecraft what location is to real estate. So timing is critical in terms of how you do things, when you do things, and also not exposing others who may say to you, look, I can do this, but I need some time to prepare my own public for what it is I might be doing. So secrecy is, I think, very important as it relates to how you frame issues, how you help others to frame issues, how you work out sequences, how you adopt positions at the right time and in a way that others are able to not only take those steps, but also to sustain them. So I would say it's not fundamental in terms of, at least in some cases, in terms of whether you act or you don't act, but it sure helps you be more effective in what you're doing and get others to join with you. And usually, if you don't want to have to do everything by yourself, you need others. So I would say putting others in a position where they feel comfortable acting and not being exposed is important. From that standpoint, secrecy is important.
And Juan, in your experience, how important was it to have secret intelligence on friends and adversaries alike, and how important was it to keep secrets?
I think it was incredibly important, Rob, and I think Dennis is right. It's incredibly important for diplomacy and the creation of trust between actors to be able to share insights and information that may otherwise be incredibly sensitive or even damaging to share. But during a conflict and war, and certainly during the war on terror, or with American troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, or currently with the present leaks, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, secrets are essential. They're important for tactical reasons. understanding where people are moving, what they're doing, what their intent is, where threats are coming from, information sharing from all sources, whether you're gathering it directly or receiving it from allies or others, is essential to getting a complete picture on intent and capabilities and the kinds of things that then allow policymakers and diplomats to make decisions. And so having secrets and a world of secrecy is not, just big government or sort of a preference of those in the intelligence world. It's actually essential to operating in a world that's very dangerous, and especially in a world of conflict where you have to understand what the adversary is doing and you have to find their intent and capabilities. This secrecy is essential to trust, and trust is critical to international relations and foreign policy. And the U.S. is beginning to corrode that trust by not being able to control its secrets and having these leaks happen over and over again.
So why, Juan, is it so difficult for successive administrations? This is one of those bipartisan issues. Why is it so difficult for government to fix this?
Yeah, Robin, you mentioned this at the start. We've now had three significant incidents of leaks. You had Bradley Manning, now known as Chelsea Manning. You had Edward Snowden, obviously, who's the major exemplar of leaks and the debate around whether or not that was wise or not, et cetera. And now this most recent case. I think there's three things at play. One, in the post 9/11 environment in the U.S., there was an urge, a surge, and a process created to share as much information as possible. The pre 9/11 period was criticized because there wasn't enough information sharing. There wasn't enough connecting of dots. And so the post 9/11 period in many ways was a hyper period of information sharing. So more people saw more information. There was more data being collected. And so that created an opportunity then for anybody from a private in the military and a National Guardsman in this case to a technician at the National Security Agency to not just access information, but then also download it. I think the second thing is more people just have gotten access generally without the proper controls. And despite attempts to control who sees what and what can be exfiltrated or pulled from data sets, those controls have not really kept up with the amount of information that's out there. And finally, I think there's a little bit of sloppiness in the U.S. intelligence community. There's often too many people seeing too many documents. And when you're talking about something sensitive like assessment of Russian capabilities in Ukraine, that perhaps needs to be constrained. And it's difficult when lots of people in the military and the Pentagon see that information. So we've got more information, more desire to share, and the controls have not been there to not allow the leaks to happen.
Actually, I checked on some of the numbers. We have more than 4 million people with some security clearance and over 1 million people with top secret security clearance. It's actually quite remarkable. Do we have too many people with too many clearances, Dennis?
Yes. Short answer is yes. We always had, when I was in government, we always had this basic concept of need to know. There are clearly way too many people having access to information they have no need to know. And it's a combination of what Juan was saying, the need to be able to connect the dots and having people who really do need to know and at the same time share their understandings is one thing, but the inability to control access and to prevent those who have no need from knowing to gain access to it has created the problem. And I think the striking thing is, Juan was describing the 3 different episodes, which are leaks from inside. And he didn't mention, by the way, something that I had to deal with a lot, which was WikiLeaks, which was it was a disclosure of different kind of information, but it was even more embarrassing in some ways. It wasn't as dangerous as these leaks are, because these leaks deal with a lot of tactical intelligence, meaning steps that could be taken very soon, or assessments about what might happen very soon. The leaks related to Russia and Ukraine, I think, are quite damaging. In some ways, the only thing that limits the damage is that there's so much of it that maybe the Russians can't sort through what's real and what's disinformation. And one of the things we should be doing at this point is we should be putting out all sorts of additional disinformation just to confuse them even more. But as long as we don't confuse ourselves in the process. Anyway, I think there is, as Juan said, there's sloppiness. What doesn't make any sense to me, in fact, I have to say it mystifies me. How could a National Guardsman not only gain access to all this, but be in a position where he could copy it, not just download it? He copied the documents. How could there be no monitoring of that? This is a really good example of where there needs to be a very thorough lessons learned. They need to look at who had responsibilities, who didn't fulfill them. And honestly, there should be some people who are fired. There needs to be some unmistakable accountability, which too often seems to be absent from the system.
So before we go to our break, let's take this to the 40,000-foot level. We have 20 different agencies that are part of what we call the U.S. intelligence community. 20 different units, military intelligence, civilian intelligence. Put it all together. I looked at the org chart, and it's a pretty complicated system. Sounds like it was formed by a committee of committees. Does it make sense, Juan?
Well, it does when you look at the authorities and the specific roles of each agency. So you've got those like the CIA that are obviously the foreign outward espionage service of the United States. You've got the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is responsible for the intelligence for the military. You've got the geospatial parts. You've got the Treasury part. So every part makes sense unto itself. I think the challenge that we've had in the U.S. has been the coordination of these organizations, and then having policies and procedures that then are consistent across the board. And this is part of the reason you have the intelligence reform post 9/11, the creation of the Office of Director of National Intelligence, which in theory was supposed to organize, collaborate, and create structures to make sure there wasn't confusion in the intelligence community, and that you did have processes to control information access and the creation of intelligence. So it is a little bit of an alphabet soup of agencies that form the intelligence community. Each one does valuable work, but I think the trick here is, are they working well in coordination? And are we doing everything to protect our information and our allies' information? And clearly the answer right now is no.
All right, when we come back after the break, I'm going to ask Dennis, do we spy on our allies? And what are the limits of such spying? In just a moment. Again, my guests today include Dennis Ross. Dennis is my colleague and counselor to the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Dennis has 25 years of bipartisan experience at high levels of government, including White House tours in the Obama, Clinton, Bush, and Reagan administrations, and service as the president's special envoy for Middle East peace. Also with us is Juan Zarate. Juan is one of our nation's leading national security experts. He's global co-managing partner of K2 Integrity, a risk management firm. He's also chairman of the Center on Economic and Financial Power and national security analyst for NBC News. Juan served in the George W. Bush administration, holding the titles of Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy National Security Advisor for Combating Terrorism. All right, Dennis, you've been around for a few years, as they say. Do we spy on our allies? And what are the limits and constraints of such spying, as we've seen from some of these leaks that we've been reading about?
I'm going to give what I'll call an artful answer here. And what I mean by that is we have negotiations, obviously, with adversaries, but also with allies and partners. It's always important for us to have as much information as we can have about what we're going to be doing, with whom we're going to be doing it, what are the factors that are influencing the decision-making among friends and allies. Obviously, some of that you acquire the information directly, and there obviously are other ways that you acquire information. I think some of the limits should have been learned from some of the consequences of the costs of having your information gathering exposed. So when we were apparently listening to the Chancellor of Germany's phone conversations, the risk of having that exposed and the cost to us of having that exposed should have created a sense of, whatever we're gaining out of that isn't worth the potential cost to the relationship and the position it put the Chancellor of Germany in. I would say, how you do information gathering has to always take into account what are the benefits that you're going to gain from it and what would be the costs if you get exposed. Too often, I think the cost, risk, benefit calculus isn't really thought through. Too many things, I think, have been done on the basis of habit. You've always done it this way, so you'll continue to do it this way without taking a step back and evaluating, okay, is this really worth it? Are we gaining so much from this that we couldn't get through other means? Is it really worth the price of exposure? And I would say there have been instances where we should have learned, okay, this really did cross the boundaries and it wasn't smart.
Very artful, Dennis. Well done.
That's me.
So Juan, in your experience, where does the best stuff come from? Human intelligence, spying, signals intelligence, sort of listening in, or just being a smart analyst who knows country X and has a good feel for what the dynamics in that country really are?
Rob, the best information is information that's candid and clear and conveys real information and real insights, in part because the person conveying it is either knowledgeable or the individuals involved in a conversation or a transaction don't suspect that they're being watched or monitored. And so the best information is candid information that frankly can be verified. And that's the art of intelligence gathering, which is, can you get as much information and as much corroboration to get a clear picture, whatever you're looking for. This goes to Dennis's point. I think the intelligence community in the United States, not to mention other intelligence services, in many ways have a maximalist approach to this. They just try to gather as much information as they can. Sometimes it leads to bad decisions as to what should be done. I was very critical, for example, in the attempt to confirm the location of bin Laden in Abbottabad, the fact that an individual was used posing as a doctor on a vaccination run. I think that was a mistake, in part because we already had enough information to know that bin Laden was likely there. This was an attempt to confirm it, but in so doing, we actually not only put that individual at risk, but we fed the conspiracy theories that the vaccination teams and the doctors in places like Western Pakistan, Afghanistan, other parts of the world are just fronts for intelligence services. That's really damaging to health security and to other things. So to Dennis's point, you have to think about the externalities. But at the end of the day, to your question, Rob, you have to have good analysis and then understanding that intelligence is imperfect, and especially intelligence that's intended to predict events or predict intent really involves decision-making and weighing of various pieces of information. And that's, again, part of the artistry of not just intelligence, but foreign policy and national security decision-making.
There's a lot of disinformation we pick up through intelligence means. And oftentimes, because we acquire it through intelligence means, there's a sense that it must be real. Without recognizing, oftentimes, some of the information we get, it has been designed so we will get it. And that also requires you to have this kind of decision-making process that not only looks to validate what you're picking up, but also takes everything with a grain of salt. The hardest things to know, for example, are what's going on inside Vladimir Putin's head. But to really be able to feel highly confident that you know exactly what an individual, a decision maker, a leader like that, who basically lives in a bubble, it's hard to know for sure what someone like that is going to decide and when they're going to decide it.
Very important. Thank you. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you for discussing this really important topic. Not easy to address. Thank you for doing it so terrifically. Dennis Ross, Juan Zarate, thank you for joining me on Dachel, Washington. It happened again. A massive security breach, spilling some of the most closely guarded secrets of American intelligence agencies all over the front pages and television screens in countries around the world. Our adversaries are gleeful. Now that they can figure out what we know and how we know it, they can plug leaks and fix problems they didn't know we knew. Our allies are aghast, especially about revelations of how much we spy on them, which really shouldn't come as a surprise, of course. What makes this most recent release of highly classified information so shocking is that it didn't come from a spy or even from a whistleblower. It came from a young, impressionable recruit, barely out of his teens, trying to impress other young, impressionable men. Sort of like guys showing off by adding weight to their bench press. This young man evidently wanted to show off and use the currency of our nation's secrets to do it. Personally, I have very little sympathy for people in public service, like Air National Guardsmen from Massachusetts and the former intelligence analyst Edward Snowden a decade ago, who come up with some excuse for violating their sacred oath to their country. This is serious stuff. Lives are at stake, especially those of people who risk everything undercover to advance our nation's interests. These leakers play God, which is never a good idea. And I have even less sympathy for public figures like fringe congresspeople out to make headlines who have the crazy idea to embrace these leakers as patriots, doing their civic duty by exposing secrets to the world. That's just wrong. Why is it so tough to guard our secrets? What have we learned from the 10 years since Snowden? I'm sure we've taken lots of precautions. I know from the talented young people who come through my own office and look for careers in intelligence, how the lengthy, arduous, complicated, and opaque the process can be. I hope we are weeding out the wrong people and not just putting up barriers to people who have unique attributes, like foreign language skills learned from extensive travel abroad that triggers extra scrutiny in pre-hire screening. Perhaps we're looking at this the wrong way. Perhaps we should be heaving a sigh of relief at how infrequently we have leaks, like the Discord data dump of recent weeks. After all, media reports note that 4 million Americans have authorized access to classified information, including about 1.3 million at the top secret level. Wow, that's a lot of people. If we only have one major leaker every decade, it's one too many, of course, but that's still a pretty good record. This is a bipartisan issue, deserving of bipartisan action. I would love to see a recruiting campaign that featured all our living presidents, Republican and Democratic, urging young people to take careers in the military and in our intelligence services, along the way underscoring their duty to nation and the need to reject the transitory self-glory that might come with releasing secrets to acclaim from the fringes in our society. We need to do everything we can to take the appeal away from what that young man in Massachusetts just did. وصلنا إلى ختام هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إن كان لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول البرنامج وبالأخص بشأن دار الاستخبارات في السياسة الخارجية، تواصلوا معي رجاء عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ Inside Washington أو راسلوني مباشرة على الرابط @RobSatloff. إلى اللقاء في الأسبوع القادم. حتى ذلك الحين شكرا وإلى اللقاء.